Yo, what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another video. I just finished watching Bucks Clippers. Great game, great battle between two finals contenders, in my opinion. Two of the top teams in each of their respective conferences. Fantastic game. Giannis Antetokounmpo really showed out. He continues to establish himself in the MVP conversation. Throughout the last week or so is probably when he started to get his most recognition. And then today on national TV, in the only game that was on at the time, I think that this is really going to start to catapult him up, get him back in those conversations. And like I said, the Bucks are really up there in the East. They're now third behind the Nets and the Sixers, which they have been for a little bit, but they continue to close in. Only 1.5 games behind the Sixers at the 1 seed, and only one game behind the Nets at the 2 seed. So the Sixers, Nets, Bucks, those three teams are really kind of taking over the conference right now. They're definitely in a tier of their own compared to the other teams. But as you continue to look at this Eastern Conference and look at these standings, to look at these three teams and the next 9 or so teams beneath them, you kind of realize how crazy that the second half of the season is going to be for the Eastern Conference. Like I said, Sixers, Nets, Bucks, those three teams are guaranteed playoff teams, in my opinion. Those three teams, there is no way I see them not making the playoffs, barring some major injuries, COVID situations, major collapse, something like that. I think that those three teams are making the playoffs. I think those are the three teams that will most likely, unless some contend or someone makes a huge move, I think it's going to be one of those three teams that wins the East. They're up at the top. And you can talk about all these different storylines between them. I think each of the teams has strengths that expose other teams' weaknesses. For example, the Sixers and Bucks both have very dominant paint forces, and the Nets don't have really anything to stop that right now. While the Nets have really good guard scores, they have Kyrie Irving, James Harden, something that the Sixers can kind of struggle with, and they have good three-point shooting that the Bucks also continue to kind of struggle with. So there's different weaknesses and strengths to each side, right? So you can talk about those three teams. I think that, like I said, one of those three teams will come out of the East, but you can make an argument for any of the three of them, and I wouldn't hate it, you know? So we talk about those three teams. You can talk about them for a while, but the next 9 teams, I could see any 5 of them taking those last 5 playoff spots, and that's kind of ridiculous. So we'll go down the list. So you have those 3 teams, top 3. Then at 4 and 5, you have 2 teams that are 500. You have the Raptors and the Knicks. The Raptors started the season really, really poorly. They had to move from Toronto to Tampa Bay in order to get around some COVID regulations across the borders and stuff. Canada didn't want them playing there, so they're down here. That inevitably led to some issues adjusting to the new play environment, stuff like that. I think that really hurt them a lot, but they've really started to step it up. Pascal Siakam has reestablished himself as an all-star type player. Kyle Lowry's been great. Fred VanVleet's been great. They're finally hitting their stride, and they're now 4th in the conference after being at the bottom of the East for a while. Next, you have the Knicks, a team that is typically not thought of as a playoff contender, at least for the last few seasons. They're 17-17. Julius Randle has been an all-star type player. Actually, he is an all-star. He's been an all-star so far this season. You've got R.J. Barrett, who's starting to step it up. You've got good pieces like a Derrick Rose, who has really helped bolster this team. You've got a Mitchell Robinson, who's going to come back from injury eventually, and he's going to be a really big addition to this team once he comes back. You've got Emmanuel Quickley, who's looking like one of the steals of the draft, and you have a coach in Tom Thibodeau, who's been there, done that, been to the playoffs a million times. He gets these Knicks playing really, really tough defense. He has them playing hard every single possession, and those are 2 things you really need if you're kind of a young, scrappier team trying to make the playoffs like the Knicks are. So those 2 teams are 4 and 5, right? I could see either of those teams making the playoffs for the reasons I just talked to you about. The Raptors are perennially in the playoffs. I would be kind of surprised if they didn't make it in the end, or at least before the season I would have been surprised. The Knicks are a little, like they don't have as much experience, so I would say they're probably more likely to fall out than the Raptors at this point, just due to experience-wise, but they have a ton of talent, and like I said, they play hard defense. They're just a really good team. Beneath them are 2 teams that are thought of on that same tier as the Raptors, where they're perennial playoff teams. Like, you never expect these teams to make the playoffs, at least in recent history. You've got the Celtics, who are at 16-17. They have Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, 2 All-Stars, one of them now an All-Star starter. After Kevin Durant is sitting out, Jason Tatum took his spot in that starting lineup. You have Kemba Walker, a perennial all-star, and not so much this season. He's dealt with injury. He's dealt with kind of some rust and stuff like that, just some inconsistencies. A team that once they get Marcus Smart back, I think that they're going to be way better. Marcus Smart is super important to this team. He is the heart of their team, as well as the anchor to their defense. He just gets everyone playing harder, and I think once he comes back, the Celtics team is going to be fine, despite all the struggles they're having. They still have a great coach in Brad Stevens, who's gotten a lot of flack for a lot of stuff, but it's not really his fault. He's dealing with a lot of young personnel. You've got like a solid rookie in Peyton Pritchard. You've got a guy who's kind of struggled in Aaron Nesmith, but has kind of started to turn his season around, so he's dealing with a lot of new personnel. Tristan Thompson just came into the fold this offseason too. You lost Gordon Hayward, so you're trying to make up for his role. There's a lot of offseason moves for the Celtics team, and they're still trying to adjust to those things. And with how much talent they have, it would be pretty surprising if they didn't make the playoffs, so I could definitely see them making it. Then you have the Miami Heat, last year's Eastern Conference champions. They are a really veteran-laden team. You've got a great player, Jimmy Butler, who had an incredible finals last season in the bubble. Really was the best, if maybe the second best, depending on where you put him and LeBron James. You could talk about their scenarios and stuff like that, but at worst, he was probably the second best player in that finals. He put up historic numbers. He tried to drag that Heat team, despite doing a lot of injuries, to that victory. They just couldn't get it done, losing in 6 games. You've got Bam Adebayo, an all-star type player, an amazing defender. He's really just stepped up every level of his game this season. You've got Kendrick Nunn, who's really stepped it up a lot. You've got all these guys who have kind of been there because they did it last season. So you've got a team that plays hard, and you have a great coach in Eric Spoelstra, who always gets the best out of his team. He maximizes his talent. And so the Heat really started kind of poorly, but as they're done dealing with COVID and injuries and stuff like that, they've really started to step it up, especially since Jimmy Butler has started to play more games, and so they could make the playoffs. Then we have 3 teams that are at 15 and 17. The Chicago Bulls, Zach LaVine's averaging nearly 30 points per game. They've got a really exciting young core with him. You could talk about Lauri Markkanen, who's missed time. You could talk about Wendell Carter, who, in my opinion, kind of reminds me of like a young Al Horford. That's always the comparison they seem to make for him. Just a solid guy. He's not like amazing, like he's not like a superstar or anything, but he's a really solid guy. He plays good defense. He can hit some shots. He just kind of does like all the little things. He's very a fundamental type player. You've got a Kobe White, who is one of my favorite young players in the league. I think he's going to be a stud at some point. I think the Bulls got really lucky getting him where they got him. A dynamic scorer at times. He does have issues with inconsistency, which is very like present in young guards. It happens all the time. And so I'm sure he'll get those down. And Billy Donovan, a pretty competent coach, got rid of Jim Boylan, who's one of the worst coaches in the NBA last season, brought in Billy Donovan, and he's really helped them out. 15-17. Right now, sitting at that 8 seed. I think that they could make the playoffs. Like I said, Zach LaVine's been like a borderline superstar type player this season, averaging almost 30 a game. They've got all that talent. They've got a solid vet in like Thaddeus Young. Garrett Temple's played good basketball. And if they make like a deadline acquisition, I could see this team making the playoffs. Then we have the Pacers, a team who also is considered as one of the staples. The Pacers never miss the playoffs. They never do. And so I'd be, again, surprised if they didn't make the playoffs, because they have a lot of talent. They have Domantas Sabonis, an all-star who just got named after Kevin Durant decided to sit out. Shout out to Domas. He really deserves that. Then you have Malcolm Brogdon, a guy who for most of the season I thought was going to be an all-star. He just didn't end up quite making the cut because he fell off a little bit. The Pacers team wasn't as good as they started the season as, and so therefore he kind of lost that name recognition. Still a really good player, a UVA player. I'm a UVA fan if you didn't know, and so I'm really happy to see him succeeding. Miles Turner, he's looked like a defensive player of the year, top 3 candidate maybe. I don't know. You have, depending on where you put guys like Ben Simmons, Rudy Gobert, all those different guys. You could talk about a Giannis still. But anyways, he's been a great defender, leading the league in block shots. If you go up against him in the paint, you will get blocked. They have TJ Warren and Karis LeVert, who are both supposed to come back at some point this season, hopefully. I'm not entirely sure on their timetables, but hopefully they come back soon-ish. And then those are 2 huge pieces to this Pacers team. If they come back and they play at the level they can, this Pacers team is going to get really dangerous really fast. And so, once again, another team, I would be surprised if they miss the playoffs. Then we have the Hornets at the 10 seed, also once again at 15 and 17. James Borrego's done a good job coaching this team. Terry Rozier has almost made it look like he's been better than Kemba Walker. Like the Celtics should have kept him over Kemba Walker when that whole thing happened. He's averaging around 20 points per game. He has so many scoring outbursts. He's been really, really efficient, and he just kind of gets to his spots and he's going to make the bucket over you no matter what defense you play on him. Really, really impressive type stuff. You've got Gordon Hayward, who's played an all-star level. He's dealt with a few injuries here and there, but hopefully he's able to stay healthy enough for this team to try and make a playoff run. You've got exciting young players in PJ Washington and Miles Bridges, who I like a lot. I especially like Miles Bridges. His athleticism is really fun, especially when you talk about him next to standout rookie LaMelo Ball, who was my pick for Rookie of the Year. LaMelo and Miles Bridges have this awesome connection, which I tweeted about before the season. I was like, I can't believe the league let them get that lob combo. It's incredible. LaMelo's been fantastic. He's both met and exceeded my expectations that I had for him to start the season. He was, in my opinion, the top rookie in the draft class, and I'm glad that the Hornets were able to grab a guy as talented as him to try and build that future around. I feel like the Hornets have kind of an underrated future, and with all those young players, all that talent and stuff like that, I could definitely see the Hornets making the playoffs. I would not be surprised about that. Then we get to number 11, the Hawks, 14 and 19. They've definitely not reached expectations. They made a lot of offseason acquisitions, a Rajon Rondo, a Chris Dunn, a Danilo Gallinari. To be fair, though, they've all missed time, even though the Hawks clearly are lacking some. They still lack pieces. They are really young. They've got guys like Cam Reddish, who is a solid young piece. They have Onyeka Okongwu, who they just drafted. I was pretty high on him coming out of the draft. We'll see what he's capable of. They have DeAndre Hunter, who I think they're really, really missing right now. He's out for a little bit with an injury. And he's a really good defender. He was knocking down a lot of his shots. He just makes life easier for everyone else on that Hawks team. And so I think when he comes back, they'll try to find their stride again. Like I mentioned, those pieces that they picked up in this offseason have missed a lot of time. Clint Capella's been great for them. He's been a guy that some people have talked about as a defensive player of the year candidate. I don't think I could talk about him as that just because this Hawks defense has been bad. And if you're a defensive player of the year candidate, your defense shouldn't really be bad. But he has been really good. Grabs a lot of boards. He's a great lob threat for Trae Young. He's great, just a great center for Trae Young, who I haven't even talked about yet. A lot of people thought of him as an all-star snub. I could definitely see that. He's putting up great numbers, and I think once those pieces get healthier and they kind of find their stride a little bit, maybe Lloyd Pierce isn't really the coach for them. Maybe they make a coaching change at some point this season. If not this season, I would expect them to make one this offseason, especially if they don't make the playoffs. And so this Hawks team, they have a lot of talent. I didn't even talk about John Collins, a guy who has been kind of mentioned in trade rumors, but assuming they keep him, he's a great young piece. And with all that talent they have there, I would, once again, this is another team I could really see making the playoffs. And then finally, we get to the 12th team in the East, the Washington Wizards, a team that I predicted to make the playoffs. I think I had them at the 8th seed to start the season. They're 13-18 right now. They are finally hitting their stride. They're 7-1 in their last 8. Russell Westbrook has finally kind of adapted his game to this new system, as well as gotten healthier. He was dealing with a quad injury that he suffered back in February of 2020 and kind of re-aggravated, I believe it was at a practice for the Wizards. So he's been doing a lot of injury. And so he's finally able to be healthy. He's playing the role he needs to play. Bradley Beal, all-star starter. He's been incredible this season. Every fan wants him on their team. A guy that a lot of people thought was going to ask for a trade. He stayed loyal. He's got this Wizards team playing really, really, really well right now. I'm sad they don't have Thomas Bryant for the rest of the season because I think he would help them out a lot. But guys like Rui Hachimura are really starting to step up. And this Wizards team, like I said, they are playing pretty well right now. They're 7-1 in their last 8 with some pretty big wins. Win over the Nuggets and the Lakers, 2 of the most recent ones. And this is a team with that much experience and that much star power with Westbrook and Beal, and then a coach in Scott Brooks, who I don't think is very good for this team, but I mean, he's doing an all right job now. It seems like guys are kind of adjusting, figuring out their roles and stuff like that. And so this is another team. I would not be surprised if they make the playoffs, which then makes 9 teams fighting for 5 spots in the playoffs. And I didn't even mention that. Well, I'll mention them real quick. The Magic, the Cavs, and the Pistons. I just don't think that they're at this level yet. They're all pretty close. The Pistons are not close. They still have only 9 wins. They're not going to make the playoffs. We don't need to talk about that too much. They're just young. They're inexperienced. They're just not quite there yet. The Cavaliers and the Magic are both 1.5 games behind the Wizards at 13-14. The Cavaliers are kind of more like the Pistons in a sense where they're just young. They're missing some guys. Andre Drummond's going to get traded. Kevin Love has been out forever. Larry Nance Jr. is out. This Cavs team just isn't quite there yet, I don't think. And then the Magic, they've dealt with a lot of injuries. Jonathan Isaac, Markelle Fultz, 2 guys out for the season. They're just missing pieces. The Magic just don't have it right now. And so I think it's those 12 teams, or specifically the 4 through 12 spots that are fighting for those 5 final playoff spots. And I didn't even mention the fact that there's a play-in game. And if you don't quite understand what that means, it means that the 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds will all be fighting for those final 2 playoff spots. I believe it's like the 7 seed plays a team, and then the 8 seed plays a team, and then like the winner of those 2 games play each other. I'm not entirely sure because it's changed a couple times or it's been mentioned a couple different ways. But either way, that means that 7 out of those 9 teams will have at least a shot at making the playoffs. And the fact that all these teams are so close, it makes me think that the playing games are going to be must-see basketball, and they're going to be incredible. This was the perfect season to add it, because when you have like out in here in the East, and I could even talk about in the Western Conference too, but I won't because that's not what this video is about. There are so many teams that are so close, and so when you have those really close spots, I could see any team winning those playing games. For example, right now, if we look at it, the Bulls, the Pacers, the Hornets, and the Hawks. The Heat, the Bulls, the Pacers, and the Hornets. Those 4 teams are like the play-in game teams. And I could see any one of those teams beating any of the other teams on any given night. And so it's going to make it super interesting to watch. It's going to make it must-see basketball. And I think it's a great time to try out this whole play-in format, see how that kind of works. I think it's a great second season to use it after they used it last season in the bubble with the Portland Trail Blazers and the Memphis Grizzlies that played in that game. Grizzlies ended up losing it. Just they were pretty injured. But anyways, I think it's exciting. The Eastern Conference is really exciting right now. A lot of people are talking about how bad it is, and yeah, record-wise, it is pretty bad. But a lot of those teams, like I said, are dealing with some circumstances. The Celtics are dealing with a major injury. Marcus Smart. They've dealt with COVID. Same with the Heat. Those are two of the bigger powerhouse teams. The Pacers are dealing with a lot of injuries. So all these different teams are dealing with different things. But then there's also teams that are surprising, like the Knicks, the Bulls, the Hornets. Those are teams that you could talk about that are surprising people and are playing up to higher levels. And I think it's really exciting. Even if the records don't show that they're great, the Eastern Conference is super exciting right now. And there's a ton of movement both up and down for teams that could potentially make movement. There's just so much space to move, so much shifting. Like the Pacers lost a game yesterday, dropped like 4 spots in the standings. That's awesome. And that's stuff really that I'm really excited to watch as a basketball fan over the course of the